Hey y'all, what's up? My name is Jess. Welcome to Roots and Refuge Farm. Today we are going to take a look at my gardens. 2 years ago, about this time, I had around 2,000 subscribers on YouTube, I think, and my garden was really starting to take off, and I was thinking of myself in the winter and thinking of how miserably I had longed for the garden throughout the winter, and how I had watched the handful of little clips I had on my phone and looked through the photos I'd taken of the summer garden just over and over through the winter. And I thought, you know, this would be really cool to make kind of like a video journal of my garden. I'd never successfully really kept a journal that had all the information I really wanted, and my thought was this will be a really great way for me to remember how things grew and how I felt about them, and also just kind of give me a ticket back into the garden for the middle of the winter. I honestly didn't think anybody would watch those videos. I remember telling my husband, there's no way people are gonna watch this long garden tour. At that point, I was accustomed to people's eyes kind of glazing over when I started spouting off all the different varieties of heirloom tomatoes that I was growing, and you know, the fact that I had gotten my hands on some pink beans and different things like that. I just was so used to people checking out, and to my great surprise, on that first garden tour, people said, no, tell us the varieties, we want to know more, we love this. And those videos were some of the first videos we ever had to just take off on YouTube, and were huge in our growth as a channel. So it's become a thing now for me to do garden tours weekly throughout the growing season, and today, I guess technically this is the first garden tour of the year. However, this is going to be sort of an overview. We have a lot of space this year, so I'm not 100% sure how we're going to tour all of this on a weekly basis without it being like 2.5 hour long videos. So let's go in here and just take a look at what's going on in my garden. Hey. Check out the arbor here. Is this just absolutely gorgeous? Really loving this. These roses I purchased last year. These are just like the cheapest rose bushes, the climbing rose bushes that I could find. Bought them at Lowe's, I think. I don't even know what the variety is called, because it just said something along the lines of coral rose, climbing rose, and so I don't know if that's its name, but it's absolutely gorgeous, covered in blossoms. I fertilized this spring with some of the rose fertilizer from Stark Brothers, but other than that, I've really done next to nothing. I didn't prune it back. Well, I'll have to do that after this year, because obviously it's going to be way too big. I just have anticipated this brings me so much joy. It's so fragrant. I love it. Some of the blossoms on this are just absolutely massive. I've been procrastinating this video because I have such big ideas for the garden this year, and even right now there are things that aren't planted that I wanted planted before our first tour. There are weeds, there's all that stuff. I haven't filled in the chalkboard yet, but this is just sort of an overview. Gotta always remember, don't let best deter you from good and done. And to me, I felt like it was more important to go ahead and share this with you guys in its imperfections than to make sure that it could be just how I wanted it to be. For those of you who are new here with us, we are in Central Arkansas, Zone 7B. My husband, Sweet Maya, and I have a small homestead here where we're raising our family and growing much of our own food. We have a lot of garden space, way more this year than in years past. Previously on our channel, we've been sharing our experience of gardening this big raised bed garden. The fenced in area here is about 10,000 square feet. In the garden beds, it's about 2,000 square feet of planting space in the raised beds out here. We are in Zone 7B, and I do garden as I would say organically. We're not certified organic. However, I don't use any sort of chemical fertilizers or pesticides on the garden. I have done things in the past like using things like hydrogen peroxide, which technically you can't call that organic. So I don't claim to garden organically. I say I garden naturally, but for the most part it is organic gardening. I love the garden. I love to grow interesting things. I love to grow beautiful things. A potager style of gardening, which is incorporating beauty throughout the garden structure and line and just creating a wonderful space. You'll see seating areas throughout my gardens because I think the best medicine for the garden is the gardener, and so I like to make a space that I want to be in. And because we are expanding this year, it's quite a bit different than in years past. We are adding a lot of space. First, let's take a look at the first new space that we've added to the garden this year, and that is the cottage garden. We've got another arbor here and a couple more climbing rose bushes. All of my tomato plants are out here hardening off right now, and they're spending a few hours out every evening, and I'm hoping to be planting these here in a few days. Now this garden is one that we're not finished with yet. Obviously it's very new. We don't have a lot growing in here. There's a lot planted that just hasn't come up yet. All of this rock was harvested from our property. We have a field next door. It's about 2.5 acres, and this is all natural stone from our rocky hillside here in the Arkansas woods. I received a comment the other day, I want to say it was on Instagram, that said that this garden looks very hobbity, and I was like, yeah, like I think that's the style that I would say we were definitely going for here. Obviously lots of natural elements, curvy lines. We didn't want this to be angular. We wanted it to be very winding and whimsical. That was the goal that we were going for here, and I feel really good about how it's shaping up. All along the edges of this garden here on the front, both sides, these are all berry bushes, a variety of berry bushes, also from Stark Brothers. All of these were just planted, so it'll probably take them a while to get established, as well as the berry bushes up in this front. There's gonna be a lot of ornamental stuff. Like this is a limelight hydrangea, and there's some nasturtiums here, some hollyhocks. Gonna have lilies here. I've got some David Austin roses that came bare root. They're just starting to sprout in these beds. We have a keyhole garden. We're gonna do an arch over here. This is all different flowers and herbs in here. And back here we did this really neat herb spiral, which I love. Can't wait to see this full and overflowing. And right here on this back row, this is really exciting, we have little baby asparagus. We just planted this, so it'll be a few years before there's any harvesting happening out of this bed. These are Jersey Night asparagus crowns that we put in, and this entire row is full of them. I think there are a few purple ones down on the end, but the majority of these are green. The idea for this whole space was for it to be, for the most part, perennials. This first year I am planting some annuals. I'm planting some things that are technically annuals, but they reseed pretty well, and then planting a lot of bulbs and tubers for things that will continue to come back year after year. This is going to take a little while to really be established, but it's been really fun to start. Back behind the greenhouse, here we have some irises, and here's a bumblebee. Hi, little guy. Here we have comfrey that is flowering and looking really lovely. And my elephant ears coming up. I told you there were lots of weeds. In this trough, I've got morning glories that are planted. These are all variegated morning glories from Baker Creek that are going to climb up over this fence. Here I have a kiddie pool full of strawberries. Along this side of the greenhouse, this is all poppies and chamomile. And here in these beds are blueberries. Now, as you can see, this side isn't done. That's because right now the bees are here. We kind of had some issues with drainage in this whole side of our yard. We did an in-ground garden here a couple years ago, and it did okay, but not great, because our soil is very heavy and very much clay, and that's when we decided that we were going to end up building up on top of the soil to plant out here. Now this whole area, you can see it's really wet and muddy. It stays like that throughout the spring, and then in the summer it just turns into like baked, cracked clay. So the bees, it's not great for them to be in the middle of mud like this. We are moving all of our beehives. We're setting up like an apiary area in the back of our property, kind of away from the street. They've never bothered us being here, but we want to set them up in a better place for them. And we will continue to build beds and stuff in this whole area, probably after this spring. I think we're going to try to move the bees this spring, and what I will probably do here is come in and somehow amend, and I'm probably just going to plant a bunch of sunflowers over here just to fill up the space for now. I don't see us finishing this spring. Again, here, got lots of blackberries all along the fence line. And I've already begun planting some things here. This is some peony, and there are quite a few of those. These are big, beautiful pink peonies. Another hydrangea, limelight hydrangea. And my hope is over the course of years as things come in to keep adding to it and just really fill these beds up in a very whimsical fairy tale way. We'll take a quick peek in the greenhouse here. We have discussed on my vlogs what to plant in the Greenstalk planters. We really like our Greenstalk planters. This is the, I got my first one, it's been like 2 years ago or so. And I got these two last year. I received a lot of really awesome suggestions as to what to plant in these, but I thought one thing was really interesting. Someone suggested growing green beans in them, and I thought that would be a really fun thing to try, to grow some snap beans. And I have some really interesting snap beans that are purple and pink, and that is what I'm planning on planting in these. I've just been waiting for our nights to get a little bit warmer. We also have another Greenstalk, which we'll get to it over on the other side of the garden, and we have bare root strawberries that are going in that. Alright, so the greenhouse is looking somewhat empty right now because all of the tomatoes are out. I still have my peppers in here. They won't get planted for a little while longer yet. More peppers down here, as well as eggplants. We've got some ground cherries, different basils, and a couple odds and ends things. There's a bunch of holy basil over here. I always have a little bit of a hard time like transitioning from being in the greenhouse such a significant amount of time every day, and then it sort of becomes obsolete. Here, a greenhouse like this gets really hot, and I could cover it with shade cloth, but I just don't have any reason to, especially since we're building the new high tunnel in the back. So we spend a lot of quality time through late winter and all through the spring, and then I kind of move everything out and close it up, and we'll move back in here about November. I'll start growing salad greens and stuff like that in here over winter. This garden is still in the place that it requires maybe a little vision to be able to picture what's going to happen over there. I am a very visionary person, but I'm also, things don't quite click with me until I see them. So with all of the beds, I had a general idea of what I wanted it to be like, but as it really began to take shape, it was better than I had thought. And I imagine that's how it'll be when the plants start growing in as well. All right, now let's come over here to our beds. As you can see, there's actually quite a lot growing. Oh no! Ethel! You saboteur, get out of the garden. Go! She's not gonna stay out of the garden. It's really not a good time for chickens to be hanging out in the garden. Too many seedlings. They will make a snack out of my precious baby plants. Every time I look at it, I'm just like, wow. I've literally just been sitting right here looking at this arch every day. You may be currently gardening or learning to garden because you want to grow food. That is the primary focus of my garden. But plant something that makes you just want to sit and look at it. Just do it. It's worth it. I think those roses were something like 20 bucks a plant, which at the time I was like, okay. And then last year they grew so slow that I was really impatient with them. But I've sat every day for the last few days and just sat right there looking at these. I've just bring my coffee and just sit and look at the roses. Plant something that evokes that kind of response in you. Just do it for yourself. I've just started to plant at the bottom of my cattle panel trellises. Out here, most of the stuff that is currently growing, these are mostly cold weather crops that I planted. I started many of these things in the greenhouse at the end of December or direct sowed things in February. So that's what is going on out here mostly. The exception is some of these warm weather things like these variegated nasturtiums down here. Those have been recently put out here. There's some sunflowers coming up in the corner. On this trellis I planted noodle beans. I always like to plant something kind of visually striking here on this front trellis right past the gate. And I can't think of a crop more visually striking on a trellis than noodle beans. The way they hang down, I don't know, most things look really, really pretty, especially when the foliage fills out and you've got fruit hanging down. But there's something about the noodle beans that just is beautiful to me. Here I've got my beets growing. I did these by multi-sowing according to how Charles Dowding does them. And so far, some of them are starting to get roots, but they don't have really big roots. I'm hoping that our warm spring days here are not a detriment to these growing well. But I can also start harvesting some of the greens off of these beets and eat the beet greens. And if we don't get any big healthy beet roots off of them, that would be a bummer, but I would at least get something from them. Here I've got some lettuce. Now this big thyme plant, it looks like a hot mess, but it's making its comeback. I cut half of it off and put it over in the cottage garden. Both halves are looking pretty rough right now, but they'll fill back out. It had just gotten really huge. And I'm hoping that that kind of greens up because it's pretty ugly right now. Here I have some chamomile that I've put out here. I believe this is the Zloty Land chamomile from Baker Creek. I told you I had lots of weeds right now. Over here are some radishes, which I've been steadily picking. And we'll probably go ahead and finish harvesting these soon. These are the sparkly red tips, and most of them are getting to be a pretty good size. You can kind of see right here. They're all looking pretty good, and it's starting to get a little warm here for radishes. Look, there's one that's starting to flower. They'll all be flowered here before too long if I don't pick them, so we need to eat those for dinner soon. On the other side there, this is a bunch of carrots. Black nebula carrots. That's what I've got mostly growing in the garden right now. And here we have several varieties of peas that are growing up this trellis, and they're all starting to flower. So we should be eating peas here in the next week. My kids will be super excited. That's their favorite thing to snack on in the garden. Peas pretty much finish up here by like May. It gets too hot for them. So on these tall trellises, the peas are growing there now. And as soon as those are all pulled out, we'll pull everything out and I'll sow pole beans all across these. And on this 48-foot row, that's about 32 feet of trellising space, and we will get a lot of pole beans from 32 feet. On the other side of this is primarily garlic, but some onions. It goes almost the length of this bed, except for that bit on the end where the carrots are. Look at these chives. These are blooming. Isn't that beautiful? So these were planted last spring, and now they're finally blooming. So if you put something like this in, they can last over a relatively decent winter. You know, where I live, we get very mild winters. And so these overwintered, and now they're really lovely. All of the square beds back here are still pretty much a mess. I haven't even cleaned them out yet because some of these we built with oak posts. And so they need to, the corners need to be replaced, and I've been hesitant to plant anything on the off chance that it might get messed up. But there are things growing here that I've planted in years past. Like these are the banana trees. Our banana trees got huge last year. They were so beautiful, such a beautiful focal point back here in the garden. Now it's not warm enough here year round for them to actually produce any fruit. I may pull one of the babies off. I don't know the variety of these. These were given to me by a friend of my mom's, but I think I'm gonna pull one of the young ones off and plant it in our high tunnel just to see if it could live through the winter. We're not planning on doing any artificial heat back there, so it might not be enough to actually help. The benefit of the banana trees, aside from the fact that they are beautiful, is that their leaves are kind of like nature's aluminum foil. You can wrap up roasts or things that you want to bake or grill in them, and they are absolutely great for that. So there is a benefit food-wise of growing them, but they're also beautiful. This bed is the one that has the majority of my brassicas, because this is the bed that we had low tunnel cover over. And most of these are getting to the point where we are ready to start eating them. Here I've got some rutabagas growing back, and you can see that they're getting to be a pretty good size. I'm not going to let them go much further because I don't want those to bolt. This is called Celtis. It's my first time to grow this. This is a Baker Creek variety called Red Mountain. It's also sometimes called tree lettuce, and it's really just a very fascinating plant. However, I was so interested in growing this Celtis because I thought it was cool that we haven't eaten any of it. I mean, I've picked a few leaves off and eaten them, and it just tastes like lettuce. But some of them look like they're starting to get ready to go to seed. So I need to just cut them and do something with them. So if you have any suggestions, I'm gonna probably do a Google search tonight and find out how to cook these things aside from just using them for lettuce. Because I know that there's gotta be some good use for the stem. Or else I don't know why you would grow this, because you can get so much more lettuce off of a head of lettuce. So I'm gonna see what I can do with this stem, and we'll have to eat these soon. But just based on how neat they are, if there's any good use for them with the stem, I'll continue to grow them. They're also very, very forgiving of cool temperatures. I moved them out, and they've done really well here in our climate. All along the whole side of this 48-foot bed, these are all leeks. And we've already mounded the soil up at the base of these leeks once, but they've grown more, so we've got to do another mound because you want to keep that soil mounded up on them. My first time growing leeks as well. I watched this really neat series, and it's a little bit of an older show, a BBC show called Wartime Kitchen and Garden, and you can watch it on YouTube. It's about the Victory Garden movement in the UK during the war, and that is where I just became convinced I had to grow leeks. It was just such an obvious staple in their gardens, and I wanted to grow them, so that's why we have 48 feet of leeks. Here, these are more rutabagas growing along here, and some really lovely frilled red Russian kale, or sometimes I think this is called ragged jack. It's looking really pretty. I've already harvested quite a bit off of this bunch, and it just keeps filling back out. I've started planting on my trellises here. This is, I believe, is an Ancash Market cucumber. I don't have a marker, so I'll have to double check that on my phone. These are just starting to come up. Hey, Toby. Now, here are all of my brassicas, which were started at the end of December and moved out. I was a little late moving them out. I should have done it sooner, and they probably would have been further along. These are a cabbage that's called, I think it's Valencia, but it's a really pretty purple ribbed cabbage, and I've got some little butter lettuces here. On this side, you can see I've got kohlrabis, and that guy needs to get eaten. I am planning on, I have a plan for that kohlrabi. I've been watching it and waiting for it to be big enough, and I'm gonna make a slaw with that and some carrots and just make like a quick slaw and dress it. I want to try kohlrabi in multiple ways. I don't have a lot of them. I've not grown them before, and I just wanted to like really give it a try and see if we liked it. I've really liked the rutabagas so far. They're really good. They're spicy and earthy. The kohlrabi is different. It's more of like a celery cabbage taste, and I want to really eat these raw as well as eat them cooked and see how much we like them, because it is a cool weather crop, and so that's something I could grow a lot of in our high tunnel this coming year. They're definitely very pretty. I've noticed that they've matured at different rates, but you'd want to harvest them, from what I've read, when they're about this big. You don't want them to be a whole lot bigger than like a baseball. I have a couple kinds of cabbage down here, but the thing that I planted the most of cabbage-wise was one called kohlrabi, which is an ox heart. That's what that means. And it is a really neat teardrop shaped head, an ox heart shape. You can kind of see the shape of these heads starting to form here. I love this cabbage, and I'm very happy that our weather cooled off a little bit so that my cabbages will actually head up instead of going to seed. Cool weather crops are a gamble in the South because our springs are so unpredictable. It might actually stay cold, which you can have a very successful harvest, or it might get really warm really fast, in which you will get almost nothing. But I always try every year because I'm just an optimist that way, I guess. Still have to plant this arch. I've got some rainbow chard here in the middle of this row. Only a couple of them are really starting to get big, but they'll grow really fast. Down on this end, this was my kale bed, and as you can see, a lot of this stuff is already going to seed. These all still look relatively normal. They're not shooting up any center stalks, so we're still harvesting. I am going to go ahead and fertilize these with some fish emulsion this week and just give them a boost so that they will grow some more leaves. Another thing that I'll use for fertilizer is manure from our alpacas. Alpacas have cold manure, so you can put it directly on the garden, and these I think would grow a lot faster if they had a little bit more nutrition. I didn't amend this bed before I planted it this spring, and it's really kind of showing in some of these, and I'll show you the difference in some kale that volunteered up in another bed, which we amended all around it, put compost all around it, and it's exploded in size. Here I've got a lot of cole crops that have gone to seed. Like here's some kale that's put off flowers, and I'm just leaving these, and as they dry up I will pull them off and pull the seeds out from them to save the seeds. So that's why I've got these all left in here. In years past, I have been far too hasty to plant my peppers, and though we get really warm days, we still can have cool nights that get down. They're not really close to freezing, but they're still a little cool for peppers. So this year, I vowed to wait to put my peppers out until it was later on. I'm gonna wait until May to plant any peppers out. And so my thing is, these plants that are taking up space, obviously we're not getting any food off of these so much anymore. You can still eat some things after they've gone to seed. You can eat the flowers of some things, and they're really good. In cases, like these are bok choys that went to seed, and you can see all of these seed pods on the bok choys. These are delicious. These are great in salads or to just eat. If you like eating snap peas, it's a very much similar texture, but they taste like a slightly spicy cabbage. I mean, they taste kind of like bok choy. And so a lot of things, once they've gone to seed, don't just automatically pull them out. You can eat the flower blossoms from kale, like you would eat you know, a head of broccoli, which is just a flower blossom. So you can totally still use this stuff while you're waiting to harvest some seeds. Sometimes plants put off a chemical when they start to go to seed that make their leaves really bitter. But just because you can't maybe eat the leaves anymore, you can sometimes eat other parts of the plant. Like seriously, these are delicious. These are coming with me. Then here's this next bed. Also, this is cool weather stuff that I sowed in the late winter. I did not amend this bed. It needs to be fertilized down here on the end. Like this kale is growing really slow. These beets are growing really slow. And that's just because this soil is kind of spent. Typically, I would have amended the beds before I planted anything in the spring. We would have gone ahead and done it. The reason why I didn't is because we just hadn't got our load of compost out here. We are becoming more intentional in our composting efforts. Our main thing is we've just been expanding so much. We do produce compost, we just don't produce a ton. And so I just didn't have any to put on here. I didn't, and now I've learned it's pretty important to do that after each season. However, the lack of fertilization probably is an aid to these carrots. These carrots are doing really well, and I've pulled a couple of them up over time just to see how advanced their roots are. And very high nitrogen in the soil will cause your carrots to grow really bushy tops, really tiny roots. But since this soil wasn't fertilized, these carrots are really getting some really nice roots. So I think these may even do better than the ones on the other side of the garden. Here I've planted out some Mexican sour gherkin, which is cucamelons or mouse melons. They'll cover this TP trellis and be really wonderful. And I'm gonna put some other gherkin cucumbers here. And then I'm gonna plant alyssum throughout the bottom of this. That's just a really good companion plant. Alyssum is a good home for beneficial insects, and so putting them under your cucumbers is something I've read a lot in companion plant books. I don't know entirely if they really are great companion plants to cucumbers or if they really just are great companion plants overall in the garden, because they are always covered in pollinators and they do provide a good habitat. Alyssum is edible. It is part of the Brassica family, sweet alyssum. It's real peppery and very pungent, so if you're not about that, you probably won't like it. But it is also very invasive, so if you plant alyssum in your garden, you'll probably have alyssum in your garden for a little while. You'll have to tear it up if you don't want it in the same spot. The next year it'll reseed. We've got some dragon tongue bush beans coming up here. You can kind of actually see this bean, see how streaky that bean is. That's growing out of. Those are doing really well. These just came up, so that guy's having a birthday today. And here, more noodle beans. I did 2 trellises of those. They just produce so much so fast. I knew that'd be some good food security for us early on in the spring. This trellis I planted entirely with clematis. There are 2 clematis plants on each side, just because I wanted that to be really pretty. I put some big tall sunflowers in the corner, and the rest of this is not planted yet. In fact, much of the rest of the garden isn't planted yet. This is where we'll have tomatoes in once they're hardened off. Up here is the kale that I was telling you about. Now, I've harvested a lot off this kale, but look how massive these leaves are. This is the same ragged jack that's in both of the other beds. But this volunteered, which does often make for hardier plants, but also we put a lot of compost around it. So this is just the difference of a plant that has extra nutrition. Here I've got mustard that went to seed. This volunteered here. Here's my other Big Daddy thyme plant. Look at this. I can never ever say I don't have enough time. That's crazy. It's just massive. But I can't cut it back because look at it. There is a little bit going on here. Here I have some cucuzzi squash. The seeds of those are from M.I. Gardener, and those are gonna really grow up and hang down and be really striking. They're supposed to be pretty resistant plants, so I'm hoping those do well here. It's technically a gourd actually, but you use it like a squash. And you can see I've got some little baby zinnias coming up in this corner. I'm gonna let that fill out. Some more sunflowers. Here I have some nasturtiums. These are probably doing better than any of the other nasturtiums in my garden, but I'm wondering if they're not enjoying the afternoon shade over here. They look really good. And here are some cucumbers that I moved over here that made it through our cold nights. These were just starts that I purchased from a local place, the local grocery store. I went on my grocery trip and they had plants and I bought them because they made me happy. And they're just called pickle cucumbers, so I'm assuming that's probably a hybrid. All these beds, kind of a mess. They all need to be just torn out, emptied out and amended. I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to do back here. I'm thinking I'd like to put in some things that are a little hands-off, like perhaps filling up one of these beds with rhubarb, things like that. Because these square beds are kind of just back off to the back of the garden, I'm not able to plant a lot of anything in them, and I've done squash in them in the past, but I want to do something different this year. So I'm thinking maybe my rhubarb in one and ginger in another, and just kind of things like that. Back here is lemon balm and mint, which are both really persistent guys. I planted some little sprigs of this years ago and it's still filling up this bed. And these are waiting for tomatoes. They're onions that go right down the middle of that one, and the rest of what's in there is weeds. There's another chicken in my garden. Oh, I forgot to tell you about this big dude. This is a catnip that I planted for my cats. And it has persistently come back. I'm about to cut this back really heavily because that's huge. This year we decided over the winter that we were going to expand our gardening efforts. And then with everything that happened worldwide with coronavirus and the ensuing shelter-in-place orders and all of that stuff, we had a lot of time. All of the travel that we did have was canceled. We had already felt like we weren't going to travel as much this year, so we didn't plan very much. And you know, we were at home. We didn't have all of the social obligations and all of the different things that would normally compete for our time in the spring. So we ended up expanding a lot, and all of the garden that I'm about to show you here in the back is brand new. Most of it is still in the process of being put in, so I'm not 100% sure how the garden tours are going to work this year. If we'll kind of go over everything in the front and then kind of look at the back, I don't know. We'll just have to kind of see how it unfolds. But right now I'm going to show you what we're doing back here, kind of the plan for it, and our progress. This will be interesting to look back on in a couple of months. Okay, so here is the back yard, well, behind the backyard. Now, I guess most notably over here on the right, this beginning here is of our 24 by 60 grower solution high sidewall high tunnel. This is the current big project that we are working on, and this will be in and finished here in the next couple of weeks. So this is going to be a big part of what we're growing this year. So I mentioned that my greenhouse gets too hot to use in the summer, but something like this is actually a benefit. And this big high tunnel is going to have raised beds in it. They'll be similar to the ones in the front, where we had some cedar milled off of our property that we cut down here, and got some cedar posts to put the beds in. But with the high sidewalls, this can be very ventilated. We can keep it cool with that. We're going to put shade cloth over the top of it to also help keep it cooler, and that should be a benefit to the tomatoes, as well as being able to keep the weather and the moisture off of them. Everything in here will be bottom watered by irrigation from Haas, is where our irrigation is from. And so the whole thing will just have a lot more control over the factors that contribute to growing. My hope with this greenhouse is to grow a lot of canning tomatoes that will be turned into sauce and salsas, and diced tomatoes and all of that, which will go up in the pantry to last us through the winter. We have a big family, so we use a lot, as well as other foods that will be preserved. And because we have so much space, I mentioned like moving a banana tree in here and doing some different things like that. Like, there will be space to play around in here. There will be space to grow some interesting things, and give some space to things that maybe might not be that productive, because we are going to produce a lot in here. So there'll be a little bit of wiggle room. These other gardens are kind of me making a classroom for myself. Here we have what is essentially kind of the early stages of no dig. We're doing it a little differently this year as it's getting established, but we did not till the ground to put these in. We laid down cardboard to kill the grass and piled up compost on top, and then we end up in this section using this water permeable fabric. This is often used by market growers. It's breathable and the water can get through, but it is a weed barrier. And this is from the Bootstrap Farmer. We chose the white because we do live in a hot area, so we didn't want anything burning on top of it. And what we're growing in here, this whole row over here is okra. This row here is summer squash down till the end, where it turns into melons, and then on this end is primarily winter squash and some more melons. I've dealt really badly with squash bugs in the past, and that's something that's really difficult to overcome whenever you do garden organically and you're not going to put poison on your garden. And my hope is by putting my summer squash back here. I know this is soil which doesn't have a bunch of eggs in it, because this came largely out of a covered compost pile and then from delivered compost. So hopefully it's not laden with pests. A lot of times when you're dealing with pests year after year, they've actually laid eggs in your soil. And my squash bug problem has definitely gotten worse over the years that I've been gardening up in the front, and my thought is maybe they're just in the soil. I don't know. I've been looking at some different methods as far as deterring by scent, like putting out dryer sheets and stuff like that. That's something that Ben Turn told me about, was doing the dryer sheets. And I've looked at some other things like traps. He was mentioning laying boards out, because a lot of times they'll go underneath the boards on top of fabric like this, and you can just turn them over and wipe them off and take care of a bunch of them at once. So we're gonna be trying a lot of different methods to keep squash bugs off back here. One thing that can be done is using like a tulle netting fabric and doing sort of a row cover. The only thing is, when you're dealing with squash, is they require pollination. So to do that, you would have to hand pollinate all of them, which is obviously gonna be very labor intensive. So I would like to try to not have to do that. So I think we're gonna try the other methods first and see what happens. Thankfully, squash grow pretty well for me here in the fall. We have a long season. So I usually get a pretty decent summer squash harvest later on in the year. Now over here I have all my winter squash. They are plagued by squash bugs as well. People often get confused about the terminology of winter squash and summer squash. Those plants grow a lot alike. I mean, they need the same thing. They need the same warmer temperatures. They're both very frost tender. They'll both die in the frost. Most summer squash are bush varieties, and many winter squash are vining varieties, but not all of them. And the real thing is, even summer squash, like if you have a zucchini, which you typically pick really young and small, where they're nice and tender and you can dice them up and saute them or grill them and they're really tasty. If you leave those for like a week, have you ever gone out to your garden and you missed a zucchini under the foliage and then you have like a giant baby sized zucchini? If you continue to allow that same zucchini to grow on that plant, it'll develop a really hard outer skin rind like a winter squash does. So really, many winter squashes you can pick really young and eat them like a summer squash. And the term summer squash versus winter squash has nothing to do with when it grows, it's when it's eaten. And so summer squash is squash you're picking young in the summer to eat in the summer, and winter squash is squash that you're letting get fully mature to store over winter. But they're both spring and summer crops. Here I've got potatoes. I've got 3 different rows of potatoes. This was also built up on top of the ground, and we have been very heavily mulching these. They've got about, I don't know, a few layers of mulch on there now, and I'll probably put a little bit more on there. I think I maybe should have stayed on top of that a little bit better. They just grew so fast, so I don't know. I'll keep adding some to it. Hopefully we'll get a pretty good harvest out of this space. Then over here is my very new sweet potato garden. These are all sweet potato slips that are in here. I've got 3 rows of Beauregard sweet potatoes, and then on this row on the end are going to be some purple ones. But they're doing okay. I just planted these a few days ago, but everything's still looking like green, and I bet it starts growing and taking off here pretty soon. One more addition that's going to happen up here, and I'm going to put it up this week. I've got the stuff that I'm going to build a bed right here on the edge of this fence. And some really sweet viewers sent me some sunchokes. Sunchokes, or Jerusalem artichokes, are like silly invasive. They will take over spaces. So I'm going to put them in a raised bed, and I'm putting them right here where they're kind of up against the fence to my goat yard, so that if they end up going under the fence that way, they'll just spring up in the goat yard and the goats will eat them. And then on this side, they're right here. There's a path at this gate where we run the 4-wheeler whenever we feed everything, so they won't be able to take over there because there's a lot of traffic. So it's kind of limiting the area that they have to grow, but they'll also be in a raised bed. The reason I want to grow sunchokes is that they're a really great source of sustainable food because they are so invasive. I mean, once you get them established, you've always got food from those. One of my favorite cookbook authors, Nigel Slater, he writes about sunchokes as he talks about their ability to make like the most creamy and marvelous soup while also producing magnificent wind. So they're known for giving people gas. So it's kind of like one of those things that I've never grown because I've been like, I live in a house with a husband and 5 sons. That is the last thing that I need to feed my family. But just given the fact that we've really been focusing on food security lately, I was like, well, let's go ahead and add these to the farm because they are just touted as amazing by many chefs. I'm sure they're delicious, and we'll just have to live with the side effects. So they'll be up here by my potatoes gardens. And the last little space here is this little afterthought garden that I put in. I kind of had a desire to put this in, and we just decided to do it. This in-ground garden I just put in and planted, so there's nothing coming up here yet. We got a pretty good rain over the last couple of days. This garden's about 16 by 35 feet, I would say. I haven't measured it. And got 3 big rows. My goal with this garden, which I need to name this garden. I really need to like name my gardens because we've literally been saying like front garden, back garden. It's getting kind of confusing because there are a lot of them now. And so we've kind of got like potato garden, sweet potato garden. We've been calling it the white garden with the white row covers, which is so silly. I feel like this one will probably end up being called the sunflower garden because there are sunflowers in the back. And then we call the front garden the big garden, and then the cottage garden. But this feels so dull. Anyway, this garden, we had the space, the soil here was good. We used to have some coops back here, and I knew that the soil was better than most areas on our farm. We had super soil that we could put down, compost, which we had purchased, that we could put down on top of this and do a layer. And I knew I wanted to put essentially what will be a no-dig bed. We went ahead and tilled it to begin with and laid the layer of super soil on top. What we decided to put back here, because I did want to really expand the amount of food that we were growing that we were going to be able to save without equally expanding the work, because we're going to have something like 250 tomato plants or more between the 2 different spaces with the high tunnel in the front. We have a lot of peppers, a lot of things that need preserving. I didn't want to plant anything else that was going to be quickly perishable. So this garden is almost entirely full of winter squashes and melons. I love melons because I have 6 kids, and melons are just things that make really great summer snacks. I mean, they just want to eat snacks all the time, and that's something that you can eat just about any time of the day. It's just a great snack. It's something that doesn't require any preparation, and it doesn't require any special needs for storage. So I've got multiple kinds of watermelons going back here, and some more personal small melons, and then a lot of butternut squash, sugar pie pumpkins, just more basic winter squash, nothing super exciting, sweet meat squash, things that will store well and provide good solid meals for us throughout the fall and winter. I did plant some cowpeas back here, and I still have a little bit of space from probably right here to there is not planted because it got dark the other night when I was working out here, and then it rained all the time since then. And then this whole back apron, these are all just pro-cut cutting sunflowers, just because I wanted to have an area of those because I wanted cut sunflowers on my table this summer. I'm waiting for things to start sprouting, which should happen this week. All of the things I planted here are things that will sprout pretty quickly when it's warm, and it is going to be warm this week. They're well watered now. As soon as these things really start sprouting well, this entire space will be mulched with straw, walkways and the beds, to help lock in that moisture and keep erosion from happening. I've got a video coming up this week about mulch because that's something that is just a total game changer to me in the garden. So I'll have that up later. If you're not subscribed, make sure you are so you can get the notification about that. I would also love some feedback from you about how you'd like to see the garden tours this year. I know universal approval is kind of a unicorn thing, and that's something that you're never gonna have. It never fails on the comments of any given video. I've got one person telling me it's too long and one person telling me it's too short. I usually do like to make the garden tours into longer videos just because I feel like it allows me to be more thorough. I do like to pack those with tips and information as well as different varieties of interesting things. To me, it helps me hugely to decide what I want to grow by seeing someone else grow it, seeing it in correlation to their hand or how much space it takes up in a 4-foot bed. That kind of stuff is very valuable to me, and that's what I want to share with you guys. So if you would give me feedback, I'd love to have it. I'll kind of take the group consensus into mine whenever I'm shooting these things. I want to be able to show you all of these things. I do have some interesting varieties of things back here. I think this could be a quicker tour back here because there are so many things that are planted that are the same, whereas I go for a lot of variety in the front. But I don't know. It's just a lot of gardens. We have a lot of gardens this year, and it makes me so happy. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. I love sharing this with you so much. It's been such a joy to me to have people in my life that validate how valuable this is to me. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. I bless you. Until next time.